You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today we have two people who've been on the podcast before. It's Kevin Johnson and Jeremy Dawkins of On Point Data, co-founders of the organisation. And it's great to have you both back on the podcast, guys. Thanks so much for joining.
It's a pleasure. Delighted to be with you, David.
For those that haven't listened to our first podcast, and we'll put a link in the chat to it, On Point Data was established 12, 18 months ago, something like that. You're a search provider, although you do an awful lot more than that, no doubt. And you've been on a journey, like many businesses, over the last 12 to 18 months. So in the first instance, for the uninitiated, tell us about yourselves. Kevin, tell us about who you are and what you do.
On Point Data was formed in the spring of 2023 by Jeremy and I. Jeremy was ex of PSG. I was formerly with Index Property Information. And we set the business up as an independent, impartial, national company because we recognize the impact of corporates on an industry that needs more than, factory processing. So what we've done is to build a company that very much puts the customer at the heart of everything that we do. We've got a broad spectrum of products and services that embrace onboarding, local authority search, indemnities, and the range of discrete additional products that a conveyancing solicitor might need. But, we just offer so much more because of our personal engagement with the solicitors and their colleagues to ensure that we're really providing them with an extra pair of hands throughout the process. Very rapidly, we've become a multi-million-pound business, and we're growing strongly because firms recognize the difference that we can make to their workflow processes. We're providing a safe haven, and we facilitate the right conversations with the right people. So when it comes down to the technical aspects of conveyancing and the solicitors need some assistance and some advice, either we can provide that ourselves, or we can put them in touch with the right people. So we're doing so much more than just taking orders for searches and delivering them back.
I want to touch on climate change shortly and really drill into that point that you've just made there, Kevin. But perhaps I'm being a bit disingenuous then, Jeremy, to describe you guys as a search company, because you now provide so much more services to conveyancers.
Yeah, you're right, David. I mean, whilst we obviously are a search company and we carry out all the legal due diligence for both residential and commercial real estate lawyers, we do go the extra mile. We also work with estate agents and mortgage brokers as well, and we bridge the gap between those different parties. It's very much a case of looking at what the lawyers need, listening to what their problems are, and actually giving them a solution to their problems.
Well, let me take that point, Kevin, that you've just made about pointing people in the right direction, whether it's yourselves that are able to provide that advice or whether it's a data provider or something like that. I attended the Law Society Property Conference, at which climate change, which is a big topic in this space, was discussed. And the overriding sentiment from the panel of people that were presenting was conveyancers are not expected to be environmental experts. And as providers, as information providers like yourselves, you should be helping them and pointing them in the right direction for advice and guidance about some of the reporting that's now in and around climate change. Is that your view?
Yeah, absolutely. Solicitors aren't subject matter experts in climate change, nor are they subject matter experts in some of the intricacies around planning, but we work with those that are. So the contacts that we have within environmental companies, we can put the firm of solicitors in touch with the right people so that when they're preparing their report on title, they can do so with some confidence. And more importantly, they can do so accurately and protect their PI position, because solicitors are coming under increasing pressure. They're overworked, overstressed, and now they're being asked to take on yet more responsibility. And we're just not sure that they can do that alone. So why wouldn't they then seek partnerships with firms like ours, where we can introduce them, for example, to people like Paul Addison and his great team at Devassess, who can just give the sort of advice that they need on planning matters, for example. Notwithstanding climate change, that's the big topic right now, but there's all sorts of other areas where solicitors could really use some good guidance, and we can facilitate that.
Because we're independent and impartial, quite often we found that lawyers have been getting reports which aren't necessarily the right reports for the type of land use or transaction they're conducting. What we will do is, when we're advised of what they're doing, is we'll actually look at the whole suite of products in the marketplace and give them true independent advice as to which report suits their needs best. And that's really valued, because quite often it can either save the law firm a lot of money by having the right report, and more importantly, it protects their PI again by ensuring that the right questions have been answered in the first place.
Let me play devil's advocate just for a moment, because from memory and having seen platforms similar to yourselves previously, they used to flag where a particular search might be appropriate. So it might flag a mining search, it might flag a flood search, for example. Is this not part of the problem, that we are flagging unnecessary searches?
I don't think flagging is I think what you've got to bear in mind is, if you're buying a property, you do want to be aware if there's any potential hazards that's going to impact on your enjoyment of the property. And different hazards will have a far different impact on your enjoyment. And arguably the big one has been flooding, which is why climate's so in vogue at the moment. Because if you've had a property that's been flooded, you will know the disruption it brings to your family, your work, everything, and getting that resolved, and the cost involved. However, environmental companies have changed their reports significantly over the last 10 years. And the vast majority of people nowadays are obtaining a report where all the information that they need day one is available at their fingertips. So they're not being charged for separate flood reports, separate planning reports, separate climate reports. They're getting it as a one-stop shop with hyperlinks to give detailed information both to the conveyancer and for the conveyancer's end client, so they can really drill in to make sure they've got the information at their fingertips to make an informed decision.
There's also a real drive to make more of this information available upfront, and upfront information, material information, is another raging debate that perhaps we won't discuss the rights and wrongs of here. But are we making progress in making that more available to people at the outset of the transaction, Kevin?
It's curious, isn't it? The local authority search was quite often the devil in the time that it took to get reports back so that solicitors could report on title. We are very much in tune, not just with our customers, but with our suppliers and the local authorities. And, we regularly pull rabbits out of hats. I don't think search delays are an issue these days. I think there's sort of so much more that's slowing down the conveyancing process. The amount of work that qualified solicitors have to take on board, because the number of qualified solicitors in this space has reduced. The number of inquiries that are being raised on every single matter. Legalito celebrated this week 6,000 matters handled through their platform. Fantastic. Peter Ambrose has done an amazing job there. But there's 104,000 inquiries attached to those 6,000 matters. That's more than 17 inquiries per matter. Are they all relevant? How long does it take to get the mortgage offer through and to get the financial organisation sort of properly on board? There's so many different facets to trading property. Searches is really only one aspect of that. And to be honest, we don't really recognise delays now in the search process as being a major impact on the time that it's taking to convey a property. Upfront information, yeah, all well and good, and probably quite important, but let's not lose sight of the fact that that we can deliver search results sort of very quickly at the time that they're required. They need to be ordered at the appropriate time as part of the process.
I think anybody's conveyancer who's dealing with leasehold properties and management companies and trying to get the management information, they're also aware that that's a delay that is just there, and it's always been an ongoing problem. Now, if there was a central register of all of those management conditions, that'd be fabulous, wouldn't it? That would certainly speed things up.
What about your marketplace. So at the moment, you predominantly serve up what you do to conveyancers and property lawyers. Do you see that estate agents will become a market for you guys in the not too distant future with these new requirements to provide more information up front?
We already work with estate agents, first of all. And until there's some government legislation, I don't think there's going to be a huge, great big uptake for the advanced information packs. Yes, it's always we embrace working with estate agents and mortgage brokers. And like I said earlier, anything we can do to facilitate bringing the three parties together so it's a more harmonious process, it has to help in speeding up the process across the board.
Kevin, you talked about inquiries and you talked about some of the issues that firms face. It feels as though conveyancers are being battered left, right, and centre. You guys have both got a fair amount of experience in this sector. Be careful what I say here. What's different now from all those years ago when you were operating your PSG and index franchise?
The landscape has definitely changed. I go back to something that I mentioned earlier. I think that there's a reducing number of solicitors wanting to work in the conveyancing space because it's just increasingly hard. The stress related to what they do is increasing. So much more pressure on them from a whole variety of different agencies, whether it's governance coming down from SRA or FCA, the requirement on them to report on things that they're not necessarily that familiar with. I can't even imagine what it's like to be a conveyancing solicitor at the moment, and bearing in mind as well that they just simply don't seem to be able to charge their value. There's continuing downward pressure on fees, and I'm not sure that they're doing anything wrong per se. I just think that they're caught up in a sector which doesn't favour them, and I think that what they've started to do in terms of coalescing, having engagement with one another, and recognising that they might be on opposing sides in a transaction, but they're not in opposition. Actually, they're all working in the same space. I think that's really important. And I think they need to do more of that. And to Jeremy's point, I think that, government legislation needs to probably come downstream to help us sort of, build a better environment for trading property. We've got to continue the dialogue, the communication, the cooperation between agents and mortgage brokers and solicitors, the client, firms like ours. It's got to continue. There's been a burgeoning number of sort of software providers that are popping up, offering solutions to individual problems, and that's great. They're shiny and new and exciting, but they're solving individual problems rather than recognizing that actually there's a whole piece of work that needs to be done to bring this sector sort of more closely together, more in alignment, working more harmoniously, and actually delivering what the client needs at the end of the day.
Most conveyancers would agree that their fees are not anywhere near where they should be. And I think we all know that if they had higher fees, they could take on less cases, allocate more time to each case, and actually that in itself would speed up the process considerably. This pressure on margin and driving to the bottom is not good for the industry, and it's not good for the end client at the end of the day. And there are increasingly people employing people that aren't qualified to do the job, or they're outsourcing to other countries to do the conveyancing, and the loser is ultimately the end client from probably not having the job done as well as it should have been done in the first place. So higher fees for conveyancers, paying them what they're actually valued and what they're worth when you look at what they actually are doing, and they've got all of the legal responsibility falling onto them. Less cases, more time allocated to each case to get it across the line, so it's not all just on time.
I guess we can sit here in our ivory towers and suggest this. The reality on the ground is that it's very, very different. We've talked about some of the things that practitioners are doing wrong. What do you see that is going right? What do you see that's really positive around the sector? I'm thinking particularly, I know you've talked about technology, Kevin, but there is a drive to improve centralized data standards through the OPDA. There is definitely some work happening around better integrations between each of those technology providers, to your point about them solving individual challenges. What else do you see that's really positive around the space?
First and foremost, the continuing desire on the part of conveyancing professionals to try and do just a great piece of work. And let's celebrate that. We can talk about a lot of the things that are wrong in the industry and the things that need fixing, but first and foremost, busy conveyancing solicitors are predominantly working for the benefit of their clients, and they work really incredibly hard to deliver in what can be very challenging circumstances. There's got to be a government intervention at some point. There's got to be a framework that's delivered around which firms like ours can operate in a fair manner and to deliver solutions into the sector. I don't think that any individual company will necessarily solve the problems. There needs to be the dialogue that we've spoken about. And there needs to be a direction of travel provided that we can again coalesce around and get on board with. Until that happens, I think that we'll continue to see software popping up, and some of it might be great software, and it may solve some of the problems. But I think that that there is a bigger equation here that needs solving, and I'm not quite sure that we're yet sort of on a path to solving it.
I think the IT companies in general in PropTech, everyone wants to keep it in their own little ecosystem. Actually, we'd be better off for the whole industry if we allowed it to be free so that we can all integrate between everybody's platforms. I know that's a hard task and people are very protective, but actually that would help the industry, because people don't necessarily want to have all their eggs in one basket. They like to be able to be flexible to work their business as they should. The other thing is, we as a company really embrace technology, and we're striving to make leaps and bounds to do things to enhance the conveyancing process, not to replace the conveyancer. And certainly the processes that we operate here, being an extension of a law firm's back office, means that we're already freeing up valuable time for their assistants so they can be doing more vital bits of work for the fee earners in the first place. We're also looking at how AI will most definitely change how things are going in certainly the next 1 to 5 years. We are going to see changes, but those AI changes have to be for the better for the conveyancing process, to bring in more consistency perhaps, and to reduce any likelihood of errors, which yet again, hopefully would reduce the ridiculously high PI premiums that law firms are having to pay at the moment. And some of those fees are absolutely crippling. The amount of work they have to do just to cover the PI before they've actually started to make headway. I mean, that issue has to be resolved. And it could be resolved if we had more qualified lawyers doing the work and better processes in place to make sure they're well protected.
There's a dichotomy. There are large companies out there that have got great R&D delivering some really innovative stuff, but not with open APIs that others can subscribe to. They're self-serving. And maybe that's an area that could be addressed, because certainly there is some technology out there that's doing some good stuff already, but it's, again, somewhat isolated. And if there was an environment where open APIs allowed customers to have the choice of the things that suit their purposes better, that improve their processes, and improve their productivity, then for sure we'll all benefit.
There's a utopian vision here of the whole commercial interest that goes alongside the property sector being set aside to find a resolution. And I guess in part that's why the previous Conservative government simply left the sector to get on with it and find a resolution themselves, because it's a very complicated issue to resolve. I think it's fair to say we're yet to see what Labour's position will be on it, especially given their desire to build more property and by extension transact more homes. I guess really just to kind of move towards a close here, there is an inevitability that change is coming, that digitization of services is coming in whatever form that looks like. again, kind of drawing on your experience, and there's lots of different people in and around this sector saying it's going to happen tomorrow, it's going to happen in the next 6 months, it's going to happen in the next 12 months. We're heading towards the top of that bell curve. Where, in your view, is this going to take effect? How long is this whole digitization journey going to take? How far along the track are we? I guess what I'm asking is when can conveyancers really start to see the benefit of all the work that is happening in and around this space at the moment?
But wouldn't it be great to say very soon now? But actually, if you look just simply at the digitization of local authority land charge records so that they can be absorbed within the land registry process for a single point of delivery, and how long that's taken, some of this stuff just isn't very easy in the UK because we're quite an old country and we've done things in a certain way for a very long time. And, you know, if you're conveying a Victorian or a Georgian property, that comes with a legacy and a history. And so bringing some of the data together is complicated. The local authorities themselves, they work in separate departments. And so digitizing land charges doesn't mean to say that you've got a solution for planning or building control or highways. And so it's complicated. But I think that, you know, we can recognize that things using good technology and with the right mindset can happen quickly. You know, just look at how quickly we've moved from using telephone handsets just to make telephone calls to smartphones that, you know, you're running your life around. So I think that we can be optimistic. I think that things can change quickly. I'm sure that they will, and hopefully for the better. And we want to be, you know, in the vanguard of that progress.
We look back on history, it wasn't that many years ago that we were actually printing off PDFs and using DX franking machines and sending sackloads of environmental reports out. It was quite a major change when lawyers decided they were happy to take a PDF by email. That was a big step forward there. And these steps just keep happening as technology improves. We know ourselves we're working on some very, very exciting technology at this moment in time that we're expecting to be launching relatively soon and making some big announcements about. But all of these things, it's never going to happen overnight. I don't think anybody can say it's going to happen in 2 years' time, 3 years' time. This is going to be a step-by-step process and a gradual process. But what I would say is, as you're thinking about the tracks, the train has most definitely left the station, and it's actually building up speed and going down those tracks now as we see this new technology, first of all being developed, and secondly being embraced and actually worked with.
We called the company On Point Data for a reason. It's about data, and it's about data transfer, and it's about putting information into the right hands at the right time. And I'm sure a lot of that will start to happen quite quickly.
I think we've articulated quite some of the challenges that the sector faces. And I, for one, I'm very positive about some of the changes that are coming down the track. And I think people like you guys, you play into that. And you know, there's no silver bullet here. There's no single thing that is going to solve the problem. You know, we talked about mandation, we talked about tech, we talked about centralization of services. They are all part of a tapestry of solutions that need to happen. And I think back to the kind of final point that we've talked about here around the timescales, that for me is why this is not going to be solved in a short, perhaps even a medium term. But it's been great to have you both on the podcast sharing your insight and extensive expertise. So thank you so much for joining.
David, thank you very much indeed for inviting us. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks, David.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. Also available on today'sconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Kevin and to Jeremy. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at today'sconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.